Okay, Joey. So words can sometimes get in the way of good communication.
Whoa, that is so true. Yeah, and you're talking to someone who is in the business of talking to people.
Yes.
And they get in the way.
Yeah, people get caught up. They get caught up in their stories, in their language, in their justifying, or they're trying to articulate what they mean, what they mean
Right.
when they say something. Um, I mean, it's
Yeah.
sometimes things are hard to talk about.
And it's funny because, a lot of topics are inherently just difficult to talk about. And some topics that are really simple or straightforward are also hard to talk about if you don't have a way other than talking to get the point across. Like, for example, right? Like, one of the, I think, standard questions that has become like a joke in my industry of counseling is, how are you feeling? How are you feeling today?
Fine.
Fine, good, I don't know, depressed, right? Like, I get these singular word answers, and what am I supposed to do with that, right? Like,
Mhm.
in all earnest, I can't do anything with that. So the next thing I do is start to like uncover that. Oh, what does fine mean to you? Oh, when you say depressed, how does that show up for you?
Yeah.
Because literally, everyone this week can tell me I'm doing fine. I'm doing better even.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Better
Yeah.
better than what? Compared to what? Right?
Yeah.
And words sometimes are like they just get in the way of my understanding of what are they trying to tell me? They're trying to tell me that they feel balled up
Hmm.
or that they feel glued to their couch or that they're having the strife with their loved one. But
Yes, and what are the layers of of this feeling of depression too? It's not usually just sort of one thing. It's all of these different parts that are interacting, and I think that's where biographs can be really helpful for someone to sort of think about, like, what are the parts of my feeling of my depression or my anxiety or my happiness or whatever. What are all the things that are part of that then you can take these cubes that represent these things and show them in relation to each other and in proportion to each other, and use that metaphor to add more meaning to that, like that this feeling is under this other feeling or buried by this other feeling or supporting that feeling or breaking out of that feeling. All of those kind of spatial metaphors we use naturally in our language, you can add to the cubes when you move them around in order to express this feeling that you have.
yeah, I think biographs is also like a tool to organize a little bit some of the elements because again, if I am in this listener role as a counselor, I talk a bit too. I'm not just sitting here in silence the whole session, but it puts a lot of onus, a lot of responsibility on the other person to have a beginning, a middle, and an end to their story. And I don't know about you, but if I'm feeling panicky or if I have a lot of emotion around something, it's not going to be entirely cohesive, right? So biographs also slows down the thinking,
Mm.
slows down the organizing of the storytelling so that people don't have to, you know, oh, I have to know what the first chapter of my depression looks like. We can start in the middle of the story. We can start at the gripping climax of the story, right? Like biographs allows people to kind of see what are the important details. What is it
Mhm.
I'm trying to get across? Because sometimes, oh, I even hate saying this, but sometimes in my work, like a client and I will both recognize we have no idea what we're talking about. Where are we going
Yes.
with this?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think this image that you create within a biograph can kind of anchor your story to bring you back to it, because you go off on this tangent. You go off on to talking about this one part of it, this feeling that you have about feeling hopeless, or or how hard it is to just make a coffee, and you start talking about that, but you have this graph to return to and say that
Right.
this thing is just a part of that whole story. And so
Yeah,
kind of, it grounds the story in this thing that you can sort of go away from and come back to, and go away from and come back to.
exactly. It's like a reference point. It's like an anchor point because, yeah, I think talking, it does promote understanding, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it promotes distraction, preoccupation, right? And then, oh, where was I in my story? Oh, shoot, I forgot what I was saying, right? Oh, let me just look down here. Oh, I was on the green section talking about my contempt in my biograph. Like it serves as a nice kind of cue, even too, because talking can dominate
Yeah.
and keep you from other things, right? Like if I'm talking a lot, I'm probably up here and I'm not probably doing a lot of this, right? I'm not feeling what I'm saying. I'm dictating to you, right? And so biograph also can be evocative in getting some of that emotion here. That saying I'm depressed is very different than saying I'm feeling depressed right now. And so I love an idea like biograph where I can drop them in, to your
Mm.
spatial metaphor. Like, what would it be like if you were in that orange space right
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's striking what you see, how people really can, once they've defined a cube color as a particular emotion or feeling, that it really is contained in that cube
now?
in like an amazing to an amazing extent, such as I think I was using it one time with you, and I had a little cube down here which was some sort of, I don't remember, it was like fear or something like that, and you said what would happen if you moved that little fear cube up, and it was like, in the process of doing that, it was very experiential, moving that cube, and I really like felt like, it was like an emotional experience moving the cube. So I think people really, they put a lot into, once they've named them and they've moved them around, it becomes a very experiential thing. It's sort of interacting with your emotions, or interacting with those events that the cubes stand for.
Exactly. Jen, I so appreciate you grounding, what we're talking about in that example of the cubes that we were moving together. Because, okay, so think, for example, if I just had talking and I didn't have another representation, I didn't have biographs, I might go like, oh, I wonder if you're feeling afraid right now. The client might go, no, that's not what's happening. Boop, that ends that entire line of thinking, right? I'm hit with the stone wall.
Yeah.
But if they've already shown me on the biograph, there's fear here, but it's underneath what I want to hold. And so I get to challenge them, and I get to promote that language through
Mm.
the action of moving the cube, instead of saying, oh, do you think you can move your fear to the top? Like, people might not know what that means. What the hell does that mean? If I'm talking about something you can't hold, it's different than moving my scarf or moving my jacket off of me. Right? I get to say, what would it be to move the fear over here? And they get to see it and they get to apply it. That is so different than just me stating it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I so appreciate your perspective on that. It is really a good example of how words sometimes really aren't enough, and to have this, the words you're speaking, yes, but also this connection to that visual, and the moving the cubes around, and you can, where you're saying, well, let's talk. We haven't talked about the black cube. Let's talk about that. So and to have those things to point to, I think are really helpful. So,
And it gives me bearings, right? Like, I'm also human. I think people look at therapists sometimes and they go, "Oh, they must have all the answers. They've read the books, they say the things, they know the words." I might forget where we were going in some moments. Like, I am fallible as part of being a human on this planet. And so it can serve as a good legend for me. Like, don't forget to talk about that fear. Like, I'm not leaving session without at least noticing this cube on the page together. Right. And so, or then we, at least both of us have an image is very different than me going, remember that time in session when you told me you were afraid? I get to go, remember that time when you held your fear in your hands?
Mm.
It's so different.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And you can take a picture of it, so you can have that in your, you know, in your file, or bring it back to the therapy session, and, you know, let's talk about this again.
Right.
Hmm.
And I love, that's a really great addition, this idea about you get to take the finding, the biograph, so say we are in the confidence of a therapy space together. I hear this sometimes, people even in my own life will go, oh, well, my therapist said this, or my therapist told me that. I probably didn't say it just like that, firstly. But if they have a biograph that they do, and they have the confidence to take it out of the space and share it with someone else, then it's not my therapist said this, it's I created this. I get a sense of power and ownership over this is my story. My therapist interpreted it with me, sure, but it brings the power back to the client. This is
Mm.
their story. It's not my therapist said that this is what's going on for me. I told my therapist this is what's going on for me. They get to be the
Hmm.
active character. They're
Yeah.
not they're not like the, ancillary character in their own story. They are the protagonist in their own lives. And that should be demonstrated. And I think biographs really brings that forward. So they can take that outside of this space.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, it was great talking to you, Joey, and we'll be back for more videos in the future. We're Jen and Joey from biographs.com, and even though words are the worst, go ahead and drop what your thoughts in the comments. Thanks a lot.